With that, we will start the Selma City Council special meeting, September 2nd, September 10th, 2021. It is 9 a.m. The Selma City Council chambers. The teleconference phone number is 1301-715-8592. The ID is 814-3857-0286. This meeting is being conducted in accordance with Governor Newsom's emergency order N2920. And with that, we'll ask the city clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Guerra.
Here.
Councilmember Mendoza Navarro.
Here.
Councilmember Trujillo.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cho.
Yeah.
Mayor Robertson.
Here, potential conflicts of interest. Any council member has a potential conflict of interest may announce the item now and recuse themselves from discussing or voting on the matter. Oral communications. At this time, any member of the public may address the city council regarding any item on the special meeting agenda over which the council has jurisdiction. No action or discussion will be taken on any item not on the agenda. Issues raised will be referred to the city manager for review. Members of the public shall limit their remarks to 3 minutes. Do we have any oral communications at this time? City clerk, do we have anyone on the line who would like to say anything?
As a reminder to the callers that we have on the Zoom application, please use the raise your hand feature in order for council to add you to the meeting queue. Mayor Robertson, we have no hands raised at this time.
Yes, sir. No, this is on a topic not on the special agenda. This is a special meeting. So if you have anything you want to say on the agenda items, you can certainly weigh in during the agenda items. Make sense? Okay. With that, we will start with our city council workshop session, financial update presentation and discussion, debt management, pension obligation bond, Rockwell Pond Park budget and project funding, American Rescue Plan Act funds. Report, please.
Good morning, Mayor. Thank you for the introduction. We have, in consultation with the Assistant City Manager, we've been working on bringing these items to you for consideration pursuant to our debt management policy. While these items may appear to be, competing or different items that wouldn't fall under debt management, they do have some relationship to that. So we thought it would be a good idea to have this presentation. I'm going to turn it over to our finance director and our assistant city manager, and we do have consultants on the line, financial consultants that will be giving us information, and hopefully we can move this along as quickly as we can here. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Again, so we'll go through a financial update presentation with a wide array of topics. They all kind of commingle and bundle together. So we thought we'd go through a little bit of it at a time. We do have Eric Scriven with NHA Advisors. So we'll have a section of this pertaining to pension bonds. But we'll go through the presentation in order so we can kind of discuss them all at one shot. And then we'll have a pause between topics just if there's any questions on that single topic, and we'll kind of open it up and then we'll move forward. So again, today we'll talk about, this is a financial update presentation and discussion with 4 topics in mind: debt management, pension obligation bonds, again, given the presentation by the NHA Advisors, Rockwell Pond Park budget and project funding, the American Rescue Plan as well, just to kind of round it off, discussing funding sources. So the first topic, debt management. We do have a debt management policy that was adopted in May 1st of 2017. This debt management policy establishes general parameters for the issuance and administration of debt, recognizing the cost effectiveness of the access to capital markets depending on the pursuit and management of the debt program. Again, it's really just setting guidelines like the rest of our policies and how we take on debt, whether it's internal or external. It's really setting parameters and those objectives that we want to meet when issuing debt, and how much we can actually set. So again, the purpose of a debt management policy is to assist the city in pursuing the following equal improvement objectives while providing full and complete financial disclosure, ensuring compliance with applicable state and federal guidelines. So for example, when you issue debt, there's a lot of parameters that go around it. There's annual reporting and things of that nature. There's items that go in the financials and how that's reported. So just issuing debt in itself is one component, but there's multiple avenues and follow-ups that need to be taken care of to stay in compliance. So your debt management policy will minimize debt services and issuance costs, maintain access to cost-effectiveness borrowing, achieve the highest potential credit rating, ensure full and timely repayment of the debt, and maintain full and complete financial disclosure and reporting. Again, issuing the debt is one component, but managing that debt is another component as well. So for this topic and for this discussion, we'll focus on one piece, which will kind of flow into the next topic that we'll have, bond financing. So you have different types of bond financing that you can go through. One of them is a general obligation bond, which is similar to what you have for Measure P. You put it to the tax roll. It has to be voted on by the citizens of the city to be able to execute that bond. But that's one form of bond that you can issue. Again, it does have to be approved by the voters. You have lease financing. Lease financing more is around capital improvements and things of that nature. You're structuring the debt around that asset per se, or other assets as well, to be able to create that financing mechanism. Revenue bonds is more of a capital improvements for enterprise funds and things of that nature, so that you have that pledge of that revenue stream within your enterprise funds. There's different avenues in which you can structure that, but again, the main focus is really having that pledge of revenues that are coming in. For example, your ambulance fund and projected revenue streams for medical payments and things of that nature. Just an example. Assessment bonds. This is something the city has done as well in the past. We actually just finished our assessment bonds and paid them off. This was completed a refinancing in 2014. We just paid them off. It was improvements in different parts of the area regarding development and things of that nature. Tax bonds. Special tax bonds, similar to what we call a Miller Rouge. This is more of a format like a developer would want to execute a CFD, a community's village district. This is kind of the mechanism they would use. So structuring around some type of improvement to be able to get that tax increment back. Refunding obligations, really again about refunding structure the debt that you have to get that better rate. And there is other obligations as well pertaining to a pension obligation bonds. So different mechanisms with debt. This is one component. You also can factor internal borrowing and things of that nature. That's all in the policy itself and how that's structured. Really, again, the policy itself structures how you're issuing the debt and the parameters in which you want to control that debt. So one of the structures within the debt limits is debt limits. The policy itself lays it out. Given the annual debt service, you can only issue 10% of what the annual general fund revenue stream is. So for the factor of this fiscal year, that the 15% equals about 1.5. So the general fund in itself does have one obligation, which it only issues out about $338,000 each year to the structure we have for 2015. And that was a refinancing.
How much was that?
It is 338,000. That amount does fluctuate, but it's a pretty flat structure. And that was a lease refund format. So that's kind of the gist of what our policy or guidelines look like. Again, setting boundaries on those limitations. You can see that 1.5 is your limitation within the general fund. Not saying that you use that format, but there's structures that you could use within our policy so you know how much. Again, you have a 2.5 as a cap that you can issue out, but you're well within that limits to be able to do so within our current parameters.
Say that one more time. So you can issue up to 1.5 million against the surplus. You can borrow up to 1.5 million against the surplus in the general fund.
It's not the surplus, it's actually the general fund itself that's your obligation. Let me go back here.
The amount of the actual.
So it's actually
general fund.
15% of your annual fund revenue. So you look at the budget for the year, ours is 16 point something, I can't remember off the top of my head. So you take that factor 15% and your equation at this point in time is 2.5 million.
And that 2.5, you can borrow that.
You can borrow,
Yes.
you could have a debt structure up to that limit. It's not a borrowing limit, it's just you're pledging the revenue streams within the general fund up to that limit. So if you have 16 or let's say 16.5, you can go up to that 2.5 as a debt payment structure. So right now we only have 338. So you do have that flexibility within our policy to meet that dollar amount and fluctuate within that amount.
And
So-
in effect, pay the city back, pay itself back.
Well,
against
the
that.
obligation is really just making that pledge to pay down that debt for whatever structure you're utilizing. So it's not a payback per
However
se.
the debt's incurred, you have.
However,
to pay it
correct.
back.
However, the debt is incurred. So there's different formats and structures, which I just went over. But again, our policy states the general fund, you can only go up to 2.5 of your revenue for the year.
And that's exclusive of going to the voters and asking for like an ad.
Going to the
dollar
voters
tax.
is a little bit different where you're setting, one, it comes to council, but it does have to go out to the ballot and it has special parameters in itself on how that structure is done. I want to say it's a 2.33 vote overall for the whole city. So just like our Measure P bond, where we had to go out and get that approved from the city, you can get that issuance in that format. So again, similar to Measure P, where we got 4 million for the police station, but you do have to go out to the voters to get that done.
But like a pension obligation bond would be subject to the city policy.
So it's all subject to the policy. I'll let Eric Scriven get into the details of what a PLB looks like. So if you have any questions on the debt management policy, I can entertain them. If not, we'll move on to the next topic, which would be the PLB.
I just want to make sure I understand it before we move on.
Oh.
So that's it, right? This has nothing to do with going to the voters.
This
These
has nothing to do.
limitations that you just
So the
discussed.
presentation is giving you avenues and the different formats. The one we're proposing and looking at today as a highlight is a pension obligation bond. It's not going to the voters.
It's subject to the limits that you just told us.
It's correct.
Thank you.
So again, at this point, we'll turn it over to Eric Scriven, who will discuss pension obligation bonds. Eric?
Good morning, Mayor and members of the City Council. We have a presentation. Raina, do I have the ability to share my screen?
Yes, you do.
Great. Okay. The intent, I think, that I've been charged with this morning is to give a broad overview. The conversation about pension restructuring bonds through either a POB or a lease structure can take at any given time 90 to 120 minutes, and usually we like to do at least 2 to 3 workshops because it is a very complex undertaking, and it's really important for decision makers to have all the facts. This presentation has been cut down quite a bit just to give you sort of the background and kind of the structure of a pension obligation bond in the context of what a lot of other cities and public agencies are thinking about, which is to restructure this pension debt that they have with Calpers so that they create a more predictable and affordable repayment structure for fiscal sustainability. Of course, interest rates are very low, and that is an equal objective by every public agency that is entertaining this idea. We're going to get into that. That'll be the focus midway through, but I wanted to give a little background on the City of Selma's debt with Calpers. The terminology is, I'm looking over to the side, I apologize, it's your Calpers unfunded accrued liability. We use the terminology, the acronym UAL. That UAL for the City of Selma is approximately 16.5 million as of the end of fiscal year 2021. The payments, as we all know, for not just Selma, but every public agency in the state of California have risen dramatically over the last 5 and 10 years. In the case of Selma, the payments have risen from $690,000 per year in 2018 fiscal year to 1.44 million in fiscal 22. That is the projected Calpers payment that you're making on the unfunded liability that you have with Calpers. Now, those payments are projected, I should say were projected to rise to about 1.83 million in 2032. However, you all may have heard there's been quite a bit of news coming out from Calpers recently. They had a stellar year as far as investments. They earned in fiscal year 21, 21.3% overall on their portfolio. And that's going to meaningfully change the repayment shape, if you will, of every public agency that has a Calpers UAL, including the City of Selma. Part of the changes that are occurring is by policy, they are going to lower the discount rate from 7.0 to 6.8. And that should, we're not actuaries, but that should lower the UAL from 6.5 million to 12.8 million. There is typically a year or two of lag so that for that 21.3% result to get into sort of the repayment, the new repayment shape. And please ask any questions along the way. This is a fairly dense subject, and I'm going to try to go more quickly through the next slides. This is just sort of the basics. Your unfunded liability is the difference between what Calpers projects you need to have to pay your retirees over the next 3 to 4 decades versus how much the city has on its account, if you will, with Calpers. And to the extent that the assets you have on account are less than what they project you need, that is the shortfall, that is your UAL. And that's where that $16.5 million number comes from. As you can see, the repayment of that $16.5 million is a very irregular shape. The blue bars here is the unfunded liability. We have also added your 2015 lease revenue bond that Isaac had noted is approximately $335,000 per year out to 2032, because we think it's important, especially in the context of the decisions you'll be making, that you look at your general fund debt payments holistically. So the UAL and that 2015 lease payment combined, you have a very irregular repayment. It's an ascending repayment shape, and the UAL repayment shape is very similar to many, if not all, other public agencies in the state of California. And we could get into the details. It really is a layered cake. Each year they would put a new base layer if there was added unfunded liability. And those layers over time have created this irregular and ascending repayment shape. Any questions? So here's where it gets interesting. As we noted, the 21.3% returns that Calpers has earned are going to dramatically change the repayment shape. We expect that the debt that you have with Calpers is going to be shortened, all things being equal, and lowered, because your unfunded liability will go down. However, there is discussions in our ears, and just about everyone else's ears are close to the ground, listening for all the rumors and whispers of what Calpers is thinking about. They are certainly going to go to a 6.8 discount from the 7.0 that is in place now. But there is discussions that discount could go down, that discount rate could go down further. And that would potentially make this blue line, this dark blue line that we have here, go up, because the lower the discount rate, the more the unfunded liability that Selma and every other public agency has with Calpers. So I think the takeaway from this slide is it's a bit fluid. This is our best estimate. We're not actuaries, but we've used the Calpers tool that they have on their website, and this is the best estimate, and it's illustrative of the changes that are happening for Selma's repayment structure with Calpers and just about every other public agency in the state. So we always like to have on the record all of the cost management strategies for City Council and other stakeholders in the city to understand. And there are a variety of cost management strategies to ensure that the City of Selma can afford this payment with Calpers. And many of these the city is already doing, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can do more than one, and I'll go through them. Prepay the UAL, the annual UAL payment early upfront in the fiscal year. Selma does that, and you capture that 3.4% discount on that payment each year. Negotiate cost sharing with employees. I am told that those negotiations largely have concluded. There may be one bargaining group that has not, you don't have that cost sharing in place. Also, it's important to note that all new employees that are governed by the PEPRA rules, those are lower cost and usually are very low on unfunded liability costs. There is another approach. Calpers offers it. It's the fresh start. And really, if you think about it, it's a very simple approach. Calpers will smooth out that irregular repayment shape that you have and make it level. And the way they do that, they require that you shorten the repayment, usually down to about 15 years. And that has appealed to some public agencies. However, they keep the discount rate the same. So you really have no present value savings. You basically are going to have a higher payment in the early years, and you'll have no payments on the out years. And so you'll achieve all of your savings, cash flow savings, on the back end of any kind of fresh start structure. Number 4, using cash reserves. I understand that the city has a Section 115 trust and intends to utilize that. We think that's a very good idea, a very good policy. Additionally, there are issuers or cities and public agencies that periodically send money to Calpers, and that is called an additional discretionary payment. When you send them a payment, you can select one of the layers that you want to pay off, and they will apply it to that layer, and you will get the reduction. I understand that that is also something that the City of Selma has contemplated and is planning for in the near term. And finally, the idea of restructuring the remaining unfunded liability. That is something that many public agencies in the state have investigated, and many have actually executed restructuring transactions. And so the remainder of this presentation will go over in a high level how that might look. And also, in our opinion, if you were to investigate it further, the right way to approach that complex investigation. Any questions? So the idea of restructuring your UAL debt with Calpers, it's really quite simple if you think about it. It is you borrow money to pay off all or a portion of your UAL with Calpers. Typically, what we've been seeing is pension obligation bonds. That is the structure that has been utilized. However, there are other alternatives. The primary one has been a lease revenue bond, where you would have to pledge assets to utilize assets as the collateral. And the reason why some have utilized that structure versus the pension obligation bond is it's quicker. The lease revenue bond, you can effectuate that transaction 2 to 3 months earlier, because the pension obligation bond, you have to go through a legal process, which is known as a validation, judicial validation, and that can take anywhere from 3 to 5 months in of itself to accomplish before you're cleared to issue a POB. One of the reasons why folks are executing these unfunded liability restructurings is because interest rates are very, very low right now. This would be a taxable bond, and taxable rates are anywhere from 3 to 3.5%, and some have been below 3% more recently. And that is dependent, of course, on the length of the term and the credit rating of the public agency issuing. Now, and I want to reiterate, the reason or the rationale that we think is of paramount importance, along with this potential savings, is to restructure this debt so it becomes more predictable, allows the city to be more resilient to future economic shocks and potential Calpers, reinvestment problems, low investment returns. The last bullet, I think, is something we're going to get into as well. I think most people have heard and intuitively know that there are risks associated with doing a pension obligation bond, giving Calpers a big chunk of money, which they will put into your account and reinvest. And the risks, of course, are reinvestment risk and market timing risk of giving them that money to reinvest and earn returns on. And we'll get into the several slides on that. Just a little update. Don't want to dwell on this. There's been dozens of public agencies that have issued UAL restructuring deals. The interest rates have been between 2.5% and 4.25%. And the most recent ones, the interest rates have been under 3%. This slide is just to sort of ensure that everyone knows that there is no one size fits all for a restructuring. Different public agencies have different objectives. And we've put several of these restructuring transactions, their repayment shapes that they chose to execute on this slide, just so you can see that it's a process that city council and staff, if they choose to go forward on something like this, it takes quite a bit of time to evaluate all the options and fit the result to precisely what the city council and staff and the community, for that matter, think is the best structure to provide fiscal sustainability and resiliency to future shocks. So we put a few options on a potential restructuring for the city of Selma, just to advance this conversation for presentation purposes. Again, this is not about selling a bond, selling the city council on a bond. This is just so that you understand how these things can work. And we put forth a few assumptions here. The lower amount, the $12.8 million amount, is the par amount that we are utilizing to pay off Calpers. That is based on the recent returns. As I said earlier, that is somewhat fluid, but we wanted to pick a number. And the interest rates are based on the city of Selma's credit rating, which is A+. And the bonds would be callable after 10 years. Those are important assumptions for the interest rates that we utilize. The options we're going to show you are a 15-year level, an 18-year level, and then a hybrid, which is 18 years that has a slight escalation of 1. And then I forget if it's at some point in 2035 or something like that, in the green line here, 2034, we have a linear decline so that we minimize the DIS savings on the back end, that area under the line that is white, where you did not have a UAL repayment previously. So as you can see, there are dozens of options that would be considered in workshop settings. We think that's the right approach if the city were to investigate this further. But this gives you a sort of a sample of how the payment could be restructured to create a more predictable repayment. And you'll note that we again have brought back in the 2015 lease revenue bond, because we think that a holistic approach to such a process would be to look at all of your general fund debt that you're making payments on, and make sure that in total, in aggregate, creates a predictable repayment structure so that the city can live with those payments going forward and has the resiliency in case bad things happen in the economy or with Calpers, so that you can absorb those types of shocks. So this page puts some of the numbers behind those three lines into a table format so that you can see that the trade-offs really between going with a shorter level transaction versus a longer level transaction, and then the hybrid in the middle, the longer but having the linear decline. Generally speaking, the shorter the transaction, the more cumulative overall savings you're going to get. Many of those savings will be on the back end, but you will get some in the first 11 years. The longer transaction will get you more of those savings in the first 11 years, but of course you're going to have in the out years some dis savings because you'll have payments where before you did not have payments. So overall, you would have less overall savings, but you'd have more savings on the longer transaction in the first 11 years. You can see that the average savings during the first 11 years goes from about $357,000 to about $515,000. The longer you go, you'll have more savings in the first 11 years. Of course, these numbers, I will caveat that this is all assuming that Calpers earns the 6.8% over the term life of the bonds that are outstanding, the POBs. So we always make sure that, and that is in fact, the risk that we'll get at in a moment. Any questions on these options or these numbers? So we wanted to put in here again why we're using the 12.8 million. Everything is a bit fluid. We're trying to listen closely to what Calpers is going to do in November when they make some decisions. But here's our calculation. Your current UAL is about 16.5 million. They'll have the 21.3% returns factored in I believe 2 years, but they're also going to factor in a new discount rate down to 6.8%. So those will together reduce the unfunded liability debt that the city has with Calpers to 12.8 million. Of course, if they lower the discount further, then the unfunded liability would go up from the 12.8 million. We just don't know at this moment, but we're picking the 12.8 million so that we could provide some option presentation to you today.
Eric, look, can I just add one comment, and you correct me if I'm wrong. The 60.5 that you're looking at is our classic groups, correct? Not the Payroll, or is that a whole?
It's everything.
Everything. Okay.
Yeah, I had slides on your various bargaining groups and what each of them were, as far as unfunded liability. But in the interest of not getting too granular, just wanted to provide the high level numbers.
Yeah, so just for council to understand, we're talking about 16.5. We talked about funding ratios and what that looks like. He's giving overall of the big picture, but each policy in itself, the classics versus Payroll, all have their own funding statuses. So, but we're looking at the whole, not individually. So I just want to make sure I point that out.
So the 16.5 is the UAL presently for all plans.
Correct. So funding status, for example, like the Pepper groups are very small. You're highly funded because that's the purpose of the program itself. Classic can vary from the mid 60s to low 70s. So depending on which group it is. So I just want to make sure I point that out and how that structure looks like. Okay.
These are average numbers that we're seeing based on.
We're looking at the whole. Correct.
The whole.
This information is at the whole.
This is everything. Yeah, I mean, that's getting into the details that the city council and the community would need to hear if you want to sort of investigate this further. But this is high level for initial overview for council.
Right. Thank you.
As I said on the previous slide, the options that are presented are meant to highlight the trade-offs. The longer you go, of course, you're on a debt structure for a POB, the lower your annual payment is, and which creates resiliency, in our opinion, to potential shocks from bad things happening in the economy or Calpers adding new unfunded liability in the future because they have poor reinvestment returns. The shorter type of transactions appeal to some because you have more cumulative savings, potentially a slightly lower interest rate because you're shorter, but you're not as resilient to those potential shocks. So there are trade-offs, and it turns into a very robust conversation once you get into these types of details. When you
What's
start
the
to invest.
limitation on that horizon, Eric? How far can you go legally on that timeline for the repayment?
You could go to 30 years. We would advise against that. That wouldn't be a good credit factor. We think that 18 years, because that's what we project your existing unfunded liability with Calpers will terminate. All things being equal, what we know right now, that's the outer limit. You could go 20 years if you wanted to lower and gain more resiliency, but you would be paying for that in the back end with the savings. So let's talk about risks. The benefits, I think, we don't need to dwell on. I think some of those are apparent in the previous pages. We like to talk about the risk, which is reinvestment and market timing risk. And simply put, Calpers is going to reinvest these monies, those returns can be volatile. They had 21.3% returns in fiscal 21, but they had a 4.7% return, which was under the 7% that they are targeting in fiscal 20. So they have been volatile. They've been trying to tighten those up, but as we all know, it's a work in progress. Similarly, the market timing risk is worth noting. If you give Calpers a big chunk of money from your pension obligation bond, and then they have a very bad year in the first year, that amplifies the loss. A lot of people who issued POBs at the end of fiscal 20 and then just realized a 21.3% return on those POB monies they gave to Calpers, they're pretty happy. But that was just luck, right? Our job as an advisor and everyone's job when they make decisions for the city is to weigh the risk and the potential that Calpers will not earn the bond rate, which in this instance was probably in the 3 to 3.5%, maybe lower, but we like to be conservative over the term of the bond issue. So will Calpers earn 3 to 3.5% over the next 18 years on average? If they do, then the city, in hindsight, 18 years from now, would consider that the pension obligation bond was a benefit. But if they don't earn that 3 to 3.5%, in fact, over those 18 years, on average, they earn less than that, then the city would be worse off. So that's the very simple way of approaching it, but that is the basic risk that everyone has to evaluate. One of the things that most cities and public agencies are doing to understand that risk, if they want to pursue the investigation further, is to stress test the potential returns with various bond structures to determine the likelihood that they're going to be successful or a benefit from a pension obligation bond. That's something that we can assist with, but sometimes a third-party actuary might be of benefit for those analyses as well. I'm going to keep going on risks. I'm going to jump into the critiques by GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association. And this critique, there were 6 major critiques, and based on the transactions that were issued back in the early 2000s, Most of them were spot on. A lot of those transactions had a lot of problems with them. But I would like to go through them quickly if that's okay. If you would like me to skip over this, I can do that as well. But it's always worth having in the record, in my opinion.
Yeah, go through them, please.
Okay. The first one is invested pension bond proceeds might earn less than the borrowing costs. That's true. As I just discussed, there's no way to avoid that reinvestment risk. You're giving CalPERS the money to invest over the next 18 years. And as we all know, their target is going to be 6.8%. Will they hit that 6.8%? That's an open question. We don't know. But the main question is, will they earn over the next 18 years, as an example, more than the bond rate? We still don't know the answer to that. That's where it's important to evaluate that with some stress testing if the city or any public agency decides to investigate this further. The next five are largely not true now. Pension bonds are complex instruments and may include swaps or derivatives. All of the POBs that have been done in the last 2.5, 3 years are fixed rate bonds. And there's no swaps or derivatives involved in any of those transactions. Issuing taxable debt to fund pension liability increases the bonded debt burden and potentially uses up debt capacity. That's a mixed answer. The truth of the matter is the CalPERS unfunded liability is on the city's balance sheet as a liability. It's the largest liability for most public agencies in the state. However, swapping that unfunded liability with CalPERS into a bond debt that's owned by investors, some would say that's a harder debt. I think that it's an interesting and robust conversation that we think is important. But the bottom line is the CalPERS is not any different than an investor. They want their money, and there are repercussions if you don't repay them. So bond investors and CalPERS both want their money, and those liabilities are on the balance sheet. Pension bonds are typically issued without call options. That's not true anymore. There were a couple back in 2020 that had what they call make-whole calls. All of the transactions since then have been issued with 10-year par calls, which is standard in the industry. Number 5, pension bonds are frequently structured in a manner that defers the principal payments. There were some in 2020 because folks were concerned about impacts from COVID hitting their revenues. But by and large, the transactions have principal amortization right out of the gate in the first year and going forward. So these transactions have been standard bond amortization structures. Rating agencies may not view the proposed issuance of pension bonds as a credit positive. That's not true. And I will caveat that, if the pension restructuring is made with thoughtfulness and policy driven, where they're structured to increase affordability of that payment and resiliency to the city's general fund if bad things happen. And in fact, we've had numerous rating agency discussions over the last 2 years. And the rating agencies initially were trying to learn more, but the common theme is if it's prudently structured and there's policies that surround the pension bond and the restructuring, it's thought of as not just a credit neutral. In many instances, it's a credit positive. Any questions on the GFOA critiques? This is really if the city public agency wants to pursue the evaluation process on a UAL restructuring, we think there's a right way to do it. Whether you end up executing a bond or not, we think that it requires significant amount of education so that city council, ultimately the decision makers, are fully briefed and understand all of the aspects of the liability and the options and the risks. We think that the stress testing is very important to understand those risks. And one thing that we think is a very important part of the process, and whether you do a transaction or not, is to put in place a pension funding policy that creates a roadmap for how you're going to address this challenge now and into the future. This is just a slide on how some have created pension funding policies to utilize potential pension bond savings, but also utilize other funds, Section 115 revenue surpluses to create various buckets of reserves to address the volatility of the pension repayment structure. Finally, this is the pension unfunded liability is the largest debt on the city's balance sheet, and it's, as you have begun to learn, it's a very complex issue. Pension restructuring bonds are perhaps the most complex type of transaction a city can undertake, in my opinion. And we think it requires a significant amount of time spent to understand, to make good decisions for your particular city. Whether you do a deal or not, we think that the idea of a pension funding policy is a very helpful tool to create the roadmap to address this challenge going forward. With that, I'll conclude the presentation and answer any questions if you desire that.
Great, thank you. Council, have any questions for Eric at this time?
Yes, Eric, I have some questions. Let me ask you, has Selma ever done a repayment to Calpers?
A repayment, like an additional discretionary payment?
Or a
I can answer that.
reinvestment, I believe you called it?
So
Were they
what he was
given
talking
amount?
about is paying down the UAL, just an early payment in a sense of way. It is our fiscal policy to do so. I do have a slide on that, so we are going to talk about that later in the presentation. So I would defer that question so we can get to that as far as what our fiscal policy looks like and what we're going to be doing here in the short term
Okay,
regarding
and then
that.
currently, the funds that we're contributing to are more of a conservative fund that is guaranteed for the employees to have a pension once they're end of their career, they're going to have something.
Correct. So the UAL itself is, again, assessing your long-term financial obligations. You have a funding status, which just for number 6, 70%, which means you have an obligation for your retirees and your employees that are going to retire as well for a funding status. What it's going to cost to have that life expectancy and pay them out, because your payments don't stop for after 10 or 5 years. They go on until the end of their term.
Right.
So you have to project out for that longevity of those individuals. And that's one thing that Calpers has done recently too, is reassess that recently. And that's why you saw the discount rate drop a couple of years ago, because of longevity that they're seeing in lifespan of people. They're going to be doing that again here shortly when they're reassessed in the asset management policy program that they have, and what that looks like, going through a full actual review to see what that term looks like too as well, because that determines their rate structure and how they do things. So it's a common practice now that they're doing. To be honest, they should have did it a long time ago to reassess that rate, because it should have been dropped. But they've gotten where they need to be, and they continue to work that program to make sure that cities and the pension program itself doesn't get in trouble. Yes, there is fiscal impacts when you drop that discount rate, but you create more of a better funding status for
Right.
those the obligations that the city has as far as their pension programs. Because there are cities or special districts or where it may be that have gotten in trouble because they're unable to pay their funded status or their UAL on an annual basis. And what that does is they have to pull back and say, okay, we can only pay your pension or your retirees so much because that's what we have. So we don't want to get into that status. That's why you make sure you pay your UL and make sure you have good fiscal policy around making that POL or that UAL and assessing it like we do have.
Right.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Be at the point where you want direction, whether to move to the next step, or are there more components of this?
I think we have
presentation
multiple
that ties
components. This is a workshop. We're not asking we're not asking you to, we're asking for direction is really what we're looking for. So it's not an action item, it is direction. I think we have multiple topics here to go forward with here that kind of all commingle and mesh. So we would be looking for action potentially at the end. To kind of summarize this sense, really what you're looking at, one, if you want to move forward looking further into a POB, education is key. There is risk. We want to manage that risk, and we want to be able to go get that analysis done, that stress test, because it is an important key. Like any tool in financing, and especially when it comes to your large debt, you want council to feel comfortable with what we're doing, because there is an obligation here for 15 to 18 years or whatever that may be that is carried out through the future. So we want to make sure the council is comfortable with whatever avenue that they portray. And to be honest, the POP is something that we're looking at and we've been discussing for a couple months now to be able to what did that format looks like for the savings for the city. So this is something that me and Eric had actually been discussing for a little bit now. So we probably would have brought this to you to discuss as an educational item too as well, regardless of what the other formats we have. Just to give this information to you, because it is a growing tool. Although it's not a new tool, this POB has actually been around for a little while now, right? But given the market right now and what other cities are doing and the stress tests they're doing to make sure that we're comfortable, you're seeing it grow recently with other cities, and a city nearby just did it as well.
to be developed concurrently with a pension funding policy?
Correct.
We would need to have that one before.
Well, we have the pension funding policy already. That's where we do the $300,000 on our general fund budget goes directly to the trust, and then we have our anything over 20% goes directly to the UAL.
With the POB.
It would change with the POB. We format it, submit them to create more best practices. One thing would be more, maybe we're taking more to the the 115 trust instead of the full, and instead of over and above the 20%, some of that directly goes to the 115 trust as well. So that kind of structure and format will go along with the presentation, how potentially, if you issued a POB, how we reformat our fiscal policy, our pension policy to best fit the needs of what we're doing. So
We get these emailed to us, the reports.
sure, we can share this. My presentation as well as Eric's will be executed to council after this presentation.
What's the cost to go to the next step on this? The cost to the city to investigate this further?
Eric, I'll turn that over to you. You know a cost factor to do a stress test?
I think the right approach is to have an honest education process, one or two workshops where city council delves into more detail this idea and how it might be useful to create sustainability and also perhaps room to accomplish other projects that you're interested in. So I would say that we are on retainer with the city on an hourly basis. We have a contract, so it would just be hours to do that, to get to the point where you would have a up or down decision on let's proceed, engage a lawyer to do a validation or pursue a different type of structure, a lease perhaps. And that at that point, then it would flip to kind of a financing process, but not before. It would be an evaluation process up to that point that council made a decision. So I'd have to understand how many workshops you want. It just comes down to time, hours. We could, let Isaac know.
Eric, I have a question. I understand that we want to kind of push forward and see things, on a lighted note, but we're dealing with a lot of money, and it's a big risk. First question I have for you is, when you stated you wanted to, if we did think about doing this item, you asked, and you said probably it'd be preferable that we bring a second agency to bring, so he could come and do that. Would you recommend that so you could kind of sit back and evaluate it better?
I mentioned an actuary.
Yes.
Yeah, an actuary would do the stress testing. That adds to the cost. There are some straightforward and simple approaches that we can do that I think are well founded in fact. But some issuers that are looking at larger amounts or even small ones, but they just want that. We think that that's a good idea. Whatever information that council needs to understand the risks and be able to explain those to your constituents, we think is what the objective is.
I also, before we move further, I'd like to just caution our city council members as to, I understand, there's a white elephant in the room, and we have a couple of things that we would love to do and make sure we could finance by getting this ability. But, the first thing I got to tell you as a representative of our community, what's the residual? What are we going to, we're going to give, we're going to take, we're going to give and take, and what's our residual? What are we going to get back? What's the amount of money we're going to get back? And if we're going 18, 20 years, are we going to be able to sustain it? Right now, we have an A+ rating, but we've been doing that and we've given. So as to staff, I ask you, these reports could have been good to brought to us a week ago so we could have digest them. So when you're talking, we could understand what they're doing. That's one. Number two, I would love to know what the white elephant in the room is. What are we going to do with this extra money? What are we going to do with it? And what is it going to be? What's it going to be feasible? Is there going to be, what's the residual on the money that we're going to invest in? Is it going to make money? I understand that every $1 million is going to make us X amount of money, but if we're going to send $9 million to a park and we're not going to get no residual and we have the community at risk, I want to know what we're doing. So let's get the white elephant out of the room and let's get the objectives of what we want to do as a council and make sure as a staff, and then have the 3 meetings so we could be, we as council can understand this fully. We're fully vetted, so we understand, we make a crucial decision that we can go to our constituents and explain to them the pros, the cons, and the risk. And I'd appreciate to get a little more information on that. This is great. This is great information, but there are other avenues, and we all know that there are other avenues we could do. So if we can get to a point, I would love that. So.
Do you have any input from the folks here? Have any questions for Eric at this point? Okay, with that, we'll continue to move on.
Would you like me to stay on or?
Yeah, you can stay on, Eric, for the rest of the presentation.
Okay.
There may be some questions after the fact when you finish. Okay, so moving forward into our other topics here. Again, Eric Scriven from Eric with NHA Advisors, going over the POB. Again, kind of the summary of it, you're looking at what the discount rate is for your current structure and for your UAL versus a POB at a lower rate potentially, and what that residual looks like, that increment, those savings, and overall. It is a large overall topic. Again, education is going to be key. We have multiple topics that we're talking about here. So again, it's really getting direction today on further how the council feels comfortable moving forward through some of these items. Okay. So our next slide, we'll move into, Rockwell Park budget and project funding. So this is one item that we've been discussing that we want to kind of go into depth today a little bit on what the project looks like, status items, and as far as what the projected fundings look like and how we can get to that point. So the first cost factor is the park budget. Currently, the estimated cost factor is 4.8. That rolls up everything, soft cost, construction, and all the parameters that we need to get that park to completion. Just a reminder, we do have a grant from Prop 68. Some of the parameters that are within that grant is that we construct some of the items that were actually proposed within the grant. So those items would be open space, walking trail, one playground, 2 basketball courts, water play park, a restroom, picnic tables, 2 of them, and an access road to in the parking lot. So again, that was within the grant. So these are parameters that we have to work in with council's discussion over as we develop that. I mean, you can have a bigger or smaller playground, or what the basketball carts look like, or how big or small the water play park is. So these are all topics we'll have. This is kind of our set structure of the estimate. Really, when it comes to the construction costs, you have multiple phases where you'll do more estimates, especially when you start to get into the design phase. And really what we're just doing is testing that budget as we continue to go forward. And as we update council and say, no, we really want to see this, or maybe we want to add that as we go through that format and discussion to go through the project. So. So the next part is kind of breaking down the estimate. And council has been giving a sheet that kind of breaks it down into sections and what that detail is. I'm summarizing the cost just with the understanding that, this project will go out to bid at some point, potentially. So we want to make sure we kind of keep that knowledge as a whole and keep it high level so that we don't get into the details so it doesn't impact that overall bid process. So estimated cost breakdown, you're looking at site work, which includes, the earthwork and things of that nature at about 2.6 million. Landscaping and green area space, 1.7, recreation area and restrooms, 825,000. Services and park energization, that's utilities, things of that nature, 2.7. Hard costs and contingency, 3.3. Soft cost, 1.5. There is other factors we're looking at 1.9. This is property acquisition, road work, because there will be improvements on DWOOF, things of that nature, and some other offsite utilities. So that's kind of the summary of where that dollars amount falls into. Kind of each area, and it kind of breaks down in even more depth that you're looking at the sheet that you have. Again, not wanting to go into itemization per se, that'll really come into the design phase. And this is just a kind of overview of what the estimate looks like and how it breaks down into certain components of the overall. So.
Keep going.
So the next section we'll go into is funding. So these are kind of estimates that the finance department is broken into and items that we can project out as far as revenue streams and how that looks. So again, some of these are current dollars we have. For example, the first one is Prop 68. We know we've already been awarded 4.4, which has parameters in which we can use it. It can only be utilized within the boundaries of the park itself, not external. For example, you can't fix DWOOF with it and things of that nature. You can't bring the utilities up to the project. You can only do utilities within the project. So it does have boundaries in which it utilizes, but again, it has parameters in which you have to do these certain different mechanisms within the grant itself. We do have current impact funds, 752,000. Those will be utilized as we go through. I think a component of that is also being utilized for veneer, correct, Mike? So we're allocating those dollars as they come through. One of the components we will look at is projected out is new homes potentially coming on. This is a risk factor. What I'm looking at is potentially the Raven project or potentially the Amberwood project. But again, given those funds coming in, I projected about 180 potentially coming in within the project phase. It can assist, but there is a risk. Again, this is developer driven. You can't per se that it's all going to happen within that time period because your structure and timeline is based off development, not necessarily something the city can overall control. So I did put a factor in here for 180 homes, bringing the cost factor of the impact per fee about 560,000. Our current impact fee structure is actually 670,000. But there are components, again, that kind of go into that mechanism because if the developer brings in more park space, they can potentially get credit to that. So again, I brought it down just as an estimate to kind of give a round number. But again, this is really depending on the growth of what the city does and how that timeline projects out. So there is risk factor in that number and what that looks like. The next one is Fund 456. This is our TOT capital fund. I projected in 248,000. This fund is really coming from Measure K. It's a component of Measure K that we currently utilize that goes to capital projects for parks. So what I did is project revenue streams out for the next couple of years with the understanding that this number would go to that. So we're dedicating future revenue streams as well as current revenue streams or banks to be able to get this project done. So the next component is street funds. This could be a mixture of local transportation funds, gas tax, things of that nature. So really what you're looking at here is a funding source for D Wolf and the road that's actually potentially in the park and how that actually arrives. So your funding source for streets sets parameters around you have to use it for road improvements or road construction or new streets and things of that nature. So because this project does have a road in it, a road component, you'd identify it as a street, as well as utilize those funds to be able to fix the work, to expand it, or whatever the project looks like and how that it gets taken care of. We definitely need improvements. It is a country road, so you will see improvements regardless to that street, so that we can make sure that we also potentially widen it even to make sure we have that traffic flow. The next funding component is CMAQ. This is something that the funds that are available with COG. This is something we look at. It's more of a funding system for a walking trail or utility bridge. The purpose of this one is really to reduce carbon footprint, to be able to reduce traffic flow, walking trails and things of that nature is also a component of it. So this is just a funding source that we look at potentially to fund that component. The next one, potentially Measure S, looking at a safety camera system. It does fit Measure S. So that's one component potentially we can utilize too as well. So you can see that we're looking at a wide variety of avenues, kind of commingle funds together, projecting out revenues and how those are going to come in to be able to utilize those funds for this project. So that's commingling those items just right there is 4.8 million. Again, your project is a total of 14.8 at this point in time. So you do have a potential shortfall of 6.5 to 7.5. I do put a range in there. The reason being some of these revenue streams, again, like the impact funds, you're projecting those out that they potentially come in, but you can't guarantee those dollars. So whatever funding mechanism we do to close that gap out, we assess that at that point in time and to make sure that, okay, where's development at? Or are they going to fit our timeline? And how are those dollars potentially going to flow in? So that's some of the dollars and on the funding sources that we have been looking at to get this done. So I know that's a lot of information for how the funding sources are. Is there any questions on those funding sources?
Before we get into funding sources, at this time, I would like to invite Mr. Cliff Tatalian, who would like to make a presentation to the council dealing with the concept of funding. He has some ideas he said he would like to share with the council, but also in terms of his vision in terms of his Selma Grove project too, and how this ties in with that. So if the council would allow that, Mayor.
Everybody good with that? Okay. Come on up, Mr. Italian.
Thank you, Mr. Jimenez. Honorable Mayor, Council. My name is Cliff Tatalian. I'm representing the retail project in partnership with the Farney Group. I've found this presentation to be very informative, and I want to thank the city manager for the opportunity to meet with him and Fernando as well. Hopefully this will be the commencement of a collaborative effort. The focus has been on the park. And what I heard just now respectfully was a very focused effort of how to fund the park. I'm here today in part to talk to you about the bigger picture. And let me start with the bigger picture. You're all familiar with the Caltrans report of 2017 and how it describes that the needed remedial efforts could cause a closure of the Floral Avenue interchange for up to a year. That would be devastating to all of the activities and ownership on the west side of the freeway. We have always been a proponent of the Dinuba Avenue interchange. It'll open up all of the residential development that you seek to achieve and promote for the city, which of course in turn generates fees as mentioned, as well as growth, economic growth for the city. Pieces of the bigger picture. The Floral Avenue interchange at some point in time will need to be mediated. And therefore, the timing of the Dinuba interchange becomes very important. With respect to the park, in meeting with Mr. Kirshner, I learned that I could be wrong in my number, but 700 to 750 children are part of the soccer program, for example, and the interest in making that park, I'm going to say, at least an attraction amongst different school districts, families, and perhaps even somewhat of a regional reach. That's very important. Sewer and water. Mr. Moreno mentioned off-site improvements, sewer, water, power for the park, the bigger picture. While there was no mention of our development, we have a concept that I've already described to the council that I think and the people on our team believe to be of substantial success and potential. The jobs, the sales tax, and the tax increment, the construction jobs and the permanent jobs. These are all examples of the bigger picture. The Dinuba interchange, the infrastructure, the park, and taking a look at the master plan for the city will also open opportunities for growth on the west side of the freeway. These are examples of what I mean by the bigger picture. Let me draw a relationship for you as to the bigger picture and funding opportunities for the park. I don't profess to know the details of the formula, but I think you're all aware, at least to this degree, there's a PIN process relative to the proximity of housing and that distance to the park, and therefore points awarded that have an impact on the dollar amounts that the grant will qualify for. And if I'm wrong, I invite anybody to correct me. But assuming some reasonable accuracy, that park and that formula is very focused on funds for the park. You think about collaboration and you think about the big picture, and I compliment you in your efforts. Mentioned housing projects, mentioned the need for further infrastructure. I don't know if anything's changed, but I understand the lift station downstream is at its max capacity. There's a need to raise funds for the Dinuba interchange for the reasons I've described and the reasons you've already studied. There's a need to mitigate the traffic demands on the Floral Avenue interchange. There's a gentleman in the audience here that seeks to have Stillman Avenue put through. I'm not going to judge one way or another on any of this. But what I'm trying to convey here today is the importance of the big picture. My conversation with Mr. Jimenez, I said, when you bring the big picture in, you have a story to tell, a greater story. And in contrast to, I'll simplify it, I have a park. You have requirements for funding, and we check the boxes. We would like to have the funding. On the other hand, if as a community, we know we need the interchange, we know we need infrastructure, we know we want development, and all of these components that cost money can result in additional housing, additional development of a commercial nature, whether it's office or retail. And all of these things are going to result in temporary construction jobs, permanent jobs, long-term generation of sales tax, as well as property tax increment. And therefore, we would like to explore all the different pots of money in a collaborative manner that will generate the funds needed for the park and the funds for the interchange and the funds needed for the offsite infrastructure. And I urge you to strongly consider the bigger picture. I understand, and I was not present, that there was a vote against moving forward with the plan, the design of the park. Given the concern, and correct me if I'm inaccurate, but it's my understanding, given the concern, how do we go on the hook for 700 grand when we don't have the money for the park yet? In order to remedy that, and in order to move forward within this time frame, I urge you strongly to look at the bigger picture and expand your story. That's where the opportunities for many different pots of funding will open up. One, in collaboration with our team, which includes my partners and the hotel and the dealership, there's opportunities for us to agree on different ways of bond funding the offsite infrastructure. What's good for the park is good for the development, and vice versa. In creating synergies between the park and the development, what's good for the development is good for the park. It hasn't been explored yet, but there are revenue generating opportunities that can result from the development of the park. It needs to be considered into the equation. In that spirit, I also want to ask you to consider including the park the way that we laid it out pursuant to our MOU. And we did it openly and did it knowing that it would be subject to further review, which is okay. And we've had talks about interfacing and having an interactive role in the park design. Manner in which the RFP for the park design was laid out did not include the totality of what we designed. And what is missing is a significant component that generates synergy in order to make this development possible. There's your tax increment, sales tax, and job creation. On another project that I'm working on of respectable significance in the city of Fresno, we're working with a consultant that has a long history with the Secretary, Treasurer's Office, Deputy Secretary Treasurer. I talked to him. I mentioned it to Mr. Jimenez. Spoke with him on the phone, knowing that we would be engaged in this meeting this morning. And he said, absolutely, the bigger picture opens opportunities at the state level. I asked him if he would be willing and interested to come to the city here to discuss and share some of his knowledge and to even go as far as consulting with the city on the different pots of money that are available once you lay out the bigger picture and the greater story of what it is that the city seeks to achieve. With this, and in conclusion, I want to offer our collaboration. I think we've at least attempted to demonstrate our willingness to collaborate. And we have the CAD drawings that can contribute to this design effort. And I'd like to ask you to also consider seriously including the totality of what we laid out so that it does foster the bigger picture in the immediate area, and as I've already described, relative to other issues. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning and open up to any questions you may have.
Question for Mr. Titilian?
Mr. Titilian, I don't have any questions, just a comment. I hear you really loud when you say it's the bigger picture. And I think we've had that conversation about it's a bigger picture. There's a bigger picture in Selma. That park's part of it, but your synergy with your development is part of it, but there's a bigger picture. And there's a lot more things to go with that park.
Right.
There's a lot more infrastructure. There's a lot of other things going on. And we need infrastructure. So when we start talking about, developments and things like that, we got to talk about what else is there before we start, giving way to the community and charging them and asking them to foot a bill. So, but I thank you for coming and giving me the information.
Thank you. I'd like to respond real quick. The bigger picture, improvement districts of all varieties. Already consulted with Cosma. There are others and the consultant that I mentioned. That bigger picture will bring to the table a variety of funding opportunities for all of the things you may consider. And the one thing that hasn't been mentioned is in consideration of that, there are adjacent property owners that may have an interest in developing housing or other types of development, and get them to the table, which strengthens that picture. Thank you.
Mr. Titilian, I have a quick question. I mean, of course, the bigger picture sounds great, but we're on a time frame with the grant. So in order to meet this grant by March 24th, that park has to be completed. How can we get there?
Directly, I would urge you to approve the design if your evaluation indicates that it's a fair value and it accomplishes the task at hand. I would do that to keep it moving. And I would be very conscientious about the fact that you have many activities, and I'll use my fingers to illustrate, that need to move forward concurrently. So while the design's moving, people need to have, we should have workshop meetings. We should have collaborative meetings with respect, for example, the infrastructure. What are you doing? What are we doing? What are you doing down the street? Where is it that by spending that money in planning for the future now, we can save money later so that when the city does capture fees for development, it's profitable. Right now, candidly, I think it's backwards. There's no money for the infrastructure. And so the fees are insufficient to install the infrastructure. Well, these projects, and when you take a look at the immediate big picture, it creates an opportunity to engage efforts on examining a variety of improvement districts. And I'm going to use it just to use the words to make the point. Similar to this presentation for the unfunded liabilities. That can be going on while the design's going on. You have a project manager in place as the design's going on. They need to pick up the speed with preliminary budgeting. And as it gets detailed out, that budgeting will need to be refined. And your project manager, coupled with this collaborative efforts, needs to keep his eye on that 2024 date and always be working backwards. We have a construction expert in the room. He knows exactly what I'm saying. And it needs to be scheduled and it needs to be monitored. By not approving the design agreement today, you're throwing the schedule behind it because there's no way in hell to build it without the design and having the drawings. It's a rock and a hard spot. Yeah, well, we're not sure if we have the money. And my discussion today, if pursued, I believe can get you across the finish line. Bigger picture, more funds, more pots of funds. I can get that man here and you guys, you got the power and to do and go as fast as you want and go where you want. It just needs to be a commitment, understanding that there's a risk. We're laying out money, for example, we bought land. We didn't know we were going to run into all these hurdles. We took a risk. You're going to take a risk, but it's a calculated risk. And by saying it's a calculated risk, you need to control it. And if it's controlled and is done on a collaborative basis instead of arguments and disagreements, it should go quicker and smoother. And I believe the possibility is all there. Good question, but I think that the intent and the effort needs to become focused and everybody needs to be going in the same direction to get it there.
Thank you for that. And I would just add, you know, the small and the big picture work here. You got to have the small picture before you can have the big picture. And people want to park. We need more soccer fields, among other recreational opportunities. We need that. And we have to remember that we represent the will of the citizens and they want this park. And we need to figure it out, how to make it happen and how to finance it. And thank you for coming today to remind us of that big picture and that there are other financing opportunities out there. This is great what we've seen so far as a preliminary, but there are other partnership opportunities that could help the city to pay for this park and to fund this shortfall at this point. And that's encouraging. And I would encourage the council members just to keep an open mind and to pursue potentially those additional funding opportunities in terms of our partnerships with the other interests in the city.
Thank you. I want to assure you that everything I'm suggesting today keeps the focus on the park, knowing that there's a 2024 deadline, but by also looking at all of the other things that I'm referring to as the bigger picture is what creates the funding opportunities that may, in fact, give you relief from drawing upon the city's funds and city's resources directly. I urge you to not only incorporate the totality of the park, commit our efforts, commit our collaborative efforts, and anything that's asked of us.
Councilmember, did you have a comment?
You have to excuse me. I'm gonna try and talk to this mask. Mr. Titillian, I had a question, or I had some more comments actually. I totally am with you. I agree with the mayor. You know, can you hear me or no?
Can't hear you. I'm sorry.
They're allergies, so it's
okay.
okay. They're allergies. So I thank you for coming in today and coming and presenting. And I agree with the mayor. You know, our community does want a park and we need a park because we haven't had a park built for many years. And I see the big picture. I do see the big picture, but I hear what you're saying, but I don't know if I'm missing that partnership component. I'm used to, well, I mean, I know that there's public and private partnerships that can go together. And I feel that if I see that you have plans that we're ready to break ground, and if we break ground together, I think that'll be faster and we'll be able to create this partnership and bring more people, more investors, more funding. I feel that we need to bring it I think the groundbreaking has to go together. Your project and the park have to go together in order for us to see movement, in order for us to work on this other funding. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see us break ground together on your project and the park to be able to move forward with this. Because you're right, there is a big picture, but we need the park.
I appreciate your
So-
comment and I agree with you. We're happy to do that. We're willing to do that. And I think it's possible to do it without slowing down the park schedule. Everybody needs to have a discussion so we understand our respective parts. And like I said, all these things have to happen concurrently. We need affirmation of the park plan in order to finalize our site plan so we can go to the market. And I've got people working on that, but we're kind of at a standstill. I agree with you. The best thing that we can do is start them together. And the beauty of it is we're going to have a discussion with or without the park, and you're going to have the discussion with or without any other development or considerations. What about the dollars for the infrastructure? And so if we can set up an improvement district or set up any instrument that seems to be the most intelligent to pursue, that's something that helps us both get started at the same time. That's something that helps fund it without digging into the pocket of the city right now. There's a lot of things. So I appreciate your comment because it's certainly is an affirmation of recognizing the need to work together and make it happen together. So I'm on call for the city manager. Thank you.
We ready to move on to our next part?
Sure. Is there any more questions regarding the items that on the screen, the funding sources?
Question for you.
Yes.
In regards to, you mentioned, when you were breaking down your list here.
Correct.
Is that a yearly projected that you're saying that that's going to
It's a
impact us?
multi-year.
Or have you, that's one of that's a major question I have for you. When you talk about that's the funding sources, you're going from impact fees, potential homes, TOT. When you're talking about those fees, I'd like for you to give us a spreadsheet as for the length of what is going to impact our city.
Okay.
When we start talking about taking money from the streets, we start talking money, Measure S. These are important, I know that, when we say that, oh my God, we need a park, but at the same time, I look at what are the takeaways? What are we taking away from? Are we taking away from the street funds or what are we taking away from? And this is not, people can, I got elected to represent the community to make sure that the funds take care of, that are being taken care of. Kids, we need parks. But the mayor just stated, I wish the council would be open-minded in regards to what it takes to get a park. But you know what? We have a shortfall. Where's that shortfall going to come from? And not only that, if I remember correctly, we did an MOU a year and a half ago, and Tillian and the city manager were to discuss, and we actually extended it. We even extended it twice. So we probably had about X amount of months where they had a dialogue and they had to make sure that they had to discuss that. I'm not picking on no one. I'm just being open because when people start saying, oh, we want a park, well, they don't want the park. He doesn't want the park. It's not that we don't want the park. We need to be fiscally responsible. What's the impact? The finance director just stated right now to us, we could take $712,000 from here. We could take from here. We could take from here. When I make a decision, I want to make sure that I make a decision based on how much of an impact is it going to be? How many years is it going to impact us? I want the park. And if we're going to talk about doing some kind of creative financing, I want to come back with some numbers of what else are we going to take care of. There's a couple of elephants in the room here in our community. Infrastructure, the parks, we need parks. We need a lot. So I would rather want more of the information brought to me. This plan here that you're presenting to us, it looks good, but what's the impact? How many years is it going to impact us? So, Mr. Mayor, when we talk about, we're going to be open-minded, we are open-minded. We all have kids. We all have but we want to make sure that we keep the city sound. We make sure that the city can pay its bills and we can keep our community, our fire department, our police department, we keep everybody working. So we're all for the park. We're 100% for the park, 100%. But we want to make sure the finding's correct. We want to make sure the people are able, there's communities down the street that are right now, the water bills tripling because they did decisions that based right now, and at the end of the day, it wasn't done. So let's get together and let's get this done. But at the same time, let's get some numbers down. Let's bring it to us so we can get this done. Okay?
So to speak to your points here, just to kind of go through the list again, the Prop 86 grant, we already have. The impacts, well, the second line item already available. I get your future impacts and we can go through that too as well on a later date, but yeah, later down the road. Yeah, you want some detail. I'm telling you, so I'm trying to explain which details you're going to get given the questions you're having. The big one's going to be on the impacts for the new development and the projections for the TOT for Measure K. Those two are the ones that are going to be projected out to fit into this budget. The rest of them are current available funds that we could utilize. Although there is an impact to, like, say, streets, right? You're talking about a big number. So that means we don't do another project versus this project with these that nature. So you're right, there is impacts in that sense. So I can bring that information back to you. I know we're talking about the park here, but you're going to see further in my presentation. We want to look bigger picture, not just the park itself potentially, because if let's say we're going to issue debt, the topic issuing debt is not just about one item or two items or three items. It's going back to what we did in the beginning of the budget process and what are our goals and objectives. So you really need to think big picture when you're issuing debt and what that looks like. We've talked about a fire station. We talked about a sewer system. We talked about different avenues or things that council see as a priority. So again, yes, we're looking at the park, but later in my presentation, you'll see we're really talking about the big picture and goals and objectives as well.
And I think that's where we are. That's why I'm saying to keep an open mind, because we're at that step where we have to really look at all sources of funding at this point. And let's keep examining that big picture, and then let's get back to the small picture, the details of how to apply these ideas in real time to actually pay for this new park. But we still moving.
Got a
on
couple
this?
more slides. Yeah, sorry. We're almost done here. So another slide here we have is funding source. Councilmember talked about our fiscal policy, UAL, and sending money. So looking at our fiscal policy, and you can remember coming back, the Calpers just took a loss, so we didn't allocate those funds that were available for our fiscal policy because of that. Now coming into the fiscal year that just passed, we were having the conversation of potential POB or pension obligation bond, but you don't want to send a UAL payment if you're going to issue debt to offset that structure. So given coming out of next fiscal year as a projection of what our end of our audit statement is going to look like, you may have available 5.5, which by fiscal policy should be sent to the UAL. Okay, so now you have another funding source potentially that can be seen as an unrestricted funding source for projects, right? Again, I'm not identifying funding sources for everything. We're talking big picture at this point too as well. So that's a potential avenue to free up unrestricted funds for what council sees they need to do with those monies, okay? Again, this is an estimate. We still need to finish the fiscal audit, but if we're gonna, if potentially a POB is a direction we're given, you really don't want to send these dollars over to that fund because you're already going to pay that fund down. So, or that obligation down. So these will, again, will free up unrestricted dollars.
Would that go into the 115 if it didn't get allocated to the
Our
park?
fiscal policy says this goes directly to the UAL. It would be something, a council action that says you want to use it in this direction because we did this. So that is an action that will have to be taken. You're going to take an action on these dollars regardless because our fiscal policy says that you will take action before finance department issues it out. So you're going to have to take action on that regardless. But I just want to give it kind of a big picture and where those dollars at.
And that's why we heard from Eric Scriven earlier, the financial consultant for the city, about reallocating that pension debt.
Yeah,
pension
correct.
obligation.
So a POB, if you're paying it down via POB, you don't want to issue these dollars. You can use these dollars to save yourself on interest on another end for whatever project you may be looking at. Okay.
Real quick, excuse me. So we could potentially take that money this year for the next year, and then next year pay instead of 5.77 or 8 million down to what we potentially would owe for 2022, correct?
We can pay it down, that's
And then
correct.
and then do the next year too, so we could do 1.5 next year and then 1.5 and done, and we're done with it. Versus borrowing 5.5.
So there's a risk factor that we talked about with the POB, and the risk factor is basically if they start getting funded, let's say they get 20% each year for next year, it's going to pay itself off, and you're not seeing the benefit of that pay down from the POB because of the interest rate. So you become super funded. So you want to make sure you have that balance there. So when he was talking about paying it down, you don't see him saying, let's pay the whole thing down. No, you want to assess that risk and only pay a percentage down to give yourself that room.
Davis lost 30 million
Okay.
bucks paying.
So
it down.
yeah, so again, this is just balancing your money and how we financially structure it all. Okay. Another option potentially for just the park mechanism, because it does have restrictions. Maybe looking at a USDA loan and how we structure that. I mean, that's another option too as well. Again, giving you options out here for the park, yes, but also looking at big picture and other items. Okay. So the next item, again, this is an item we've already talked about.
To
Not
stop
say-
you before you hit the ARP, what about EV, electric vehicles? If we had a charging station out there, the FCRTA said there is some significant money out there, not just CMAQ, not just congestion mitigation, air quality, but there's some. Yeah, exactly. Could we set up solar out there?
So that can help with the project as far as establishing charging stations and things of that nature. Maybe help with a little bit of the parking structure per se. So that is an avenue potentially we could look at.
I think there's some pretty good money out there for setting up EV stations.
So can we put the panels on the top and get money returned?
I think that's just for the charging systems is how they're referring to. So
But solar is also another option.
solar is an
potentially.
option. It really, when it comes to solar for this project, is looking at what the usage is going to be, because we still have to, through the architectural, you develop the engineer, what your wattage and everything's going to be, your usage, to assess that part of it. So we really have to come back and figure out what that looks like, because you don't have big buildings in there, right? You have some lighting structures, a restroom. You don't have a police station where you have all these utility that needs to be utilized. So it's something that has to be assessed as part of the project, because it is an avenue, an asset that will help save costs in future terms. So that's something we look at through the project itself. Mhm. Any other questions prior to? Okay, so again, American Rescue Plan, we've already talked about this. Just bringing it up as more of a topic because it is a potential funding source for projects. Again, using that as a broad term, not as just the park. So we're going to receive 5.9 million. Allowable uses for these categories itself is support public health expenditures, address negative impacts and caused by the public health emergency, replace lost public sector revenues, provide premium pay for essential workers, and invest water, sewer, and broadband infrastructures. Again, these items all break down into very much a lot of different details on how you can structure that, but these are the main categories that are involved in that. So there is one that I want to relay again that we talked about in the past. Payroll and covered benefits for public health employees. So a lot of this revolves around public safety for us, the ambulance fund, PD, the fire department, and how they interacted during the COVID process and currently, right? So what they have to assess is they're saying that public safety in general had a COVID impact because they're constantly coming into contact with the public. So those cost factors as far as the labor can be offset with these funds and be utilized to free up general fund dollars. There's calculations that go into it. Again, the final rule has not come out. I actually just had a presentation yesterday, which says they're supposed to be coming out next week. So hopefully we can get that information, because this verbiage here came out of one of the rules, but I know this verbiage is actually changed to now you got to assess that they had a 50% impact and what that looks like. So there is other verbiages come after this, potentially will change this, but we'll look to the final rule to get that clean information. And again, that should be coming out shortly.
So that
So-
means you can pay public safety with that goes towards COVID potentially, and then that money that is not used towards public safety would be freed up to use for
the
potential
general
other
fund?
uses?
Mhm,
Okay.
yes.
Correct. So you're basically what you're doing is bringing it in to pay for the cost of the labor, but freeing up unrestricted dollars, potential projects. Okay. So that
Was
concludes
there a
my
limit
presentation.
on that? How much the payroll costs? Was there a percentage limit?
So you can utilize these funds over multiple years. So 5.9 in the grand scheme of things from our labor costs, which is what, 60%, and safety is a big part of that. We can chew through those dollars pretty good.
And there's no limit on how much you could use, how much payroll you could free up within the confines of that 5 point.
Within that parameter, no, there's not. So again, I do give discretion as far as wait to that final rule, so that we have clear information. Obviously, I talked to legal as well to make sure we're on the same path and kind of flush that out. But from what I heard yesterday, it's supposed to be coming out next week. So, and once that does come out, we'll give a final update.
Which is why Isaac's been so cautious about, giving advice on that, because we're waiting for the final guidelines.
With 5.5 available in the pension and then 2 deficit.
So again, just kind of a summary overall, we've been assessing with the interim city manager, department heads, and kind of looking at the big picture on where we're all at. There's a lot of projects we're talking about, again, fire station, sewer system, a lot of different avenues in which we can potentially come. This is not an action item for a reason. We need to think big picture and have more conversations. It's really, at this point, getting direction on what council would like to see next and how we do these things. So if there's no other questions.
Councilmember, did you need a break? Councilmember Navari, are you okay? Is everybody good so far? Should we keep rolling? All right,
That concludes my
take a
presentation.
break. Let's take a 5-minute break. Then we'll be back at 10:55.
Groundbreaking has to go hand in hand. I agree. But you asked that. Starts to, are we going with this or are we going with the Tillian scale? Oh, gotcha. Okay.
All right, we're back in session just a little bit early, and Finance Director Moreno is going to summarize his presentation.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. So at this point, we've kind of gone through a lot of different details, a lot of information. I know we kind of went through a little bit fast, but we can expand these and kind of be here for a couple hours. So we want, again, this is really an educational point and getting some further direction from council and how we start to move forward. So one of the items that I want to talk about to get direction from is the POB. As Mr. Scriven spoke on, it's best practice to be able to get some more education and get council comfortable because there is risk factors. And again, with any debt, you really want to go through the details and the nitty gritty and what that looks like. So council and the constituents are comfortable with what's going on with the city because you have some long-term obligation that you will be executing. So is there any direction from the council as majority on how you'd like to move forward? Again, with his statement and really bringing it back for a bigger, or refining that scope and what that looks like and giving more education on risk and how the structure moves forward.
I'd also like to move forward and learn more about the pension finance option. Okay.
So I believe I see consensus from everyone. Is that
Yes.
great? Thank you.
Thank you. And then did we have a comment from Mr. Nelson? Would you like to do a presentation?
Mike Nelson, 3400 McCall, Selma. I wanted just to share a few thoughts about the Rockwell Pond development, the park out there. As a developer in Selma for 50 years now, I listened and I'm thinking you guys are getting ready to bite off something that you have no idea how big it is. Just want to share my concern because Mr. Tutillian, developer, good guy, know him for a long time, talks about the $750,000 that you have to spend to hire somebody to tell you what it's going to cost to really do this. I want to say, well, Cliff, why don't you put the money up and you pay that $750 and then see what happens, because you're not going to really know until that company comes in and does this analysis. Add to that right now, the construction industry, every job you bid is 30% higher than you thought it was going to be. All the materials are up. You can't get materials. It is just, I don't want to say it's a disaster, but it's extremely expensive to build anything right now. Plus, everybody's so busy. And so they can pick and choose what projects they want to work on and what they don't want to work on. When you did your police station, I believe you got an estimate from the people that were given estimates before it ever started that it was going to cost X. And then I believe it ended up costing triple X, if I'm not mistaken. So that Rockwell Pond is that park, it's going to cost you more money than what you've been told so far. Number two, the city wants a park, and parks are great, you know. I get it, but I've also told you that there is an option. That's the Walmart property, the 40 acres, which your development costs there would be significantly less than what it would be to go out to Rockwell. When you go out to Rockwell, if the planning department's doing their job, they're going to say, well, this is going to be for future development. So all the utilities that are going to go out there have got to be able to handle that park plus everything north of that park to Dinuba. Larger sewer lines, larger water lines, and that's going to add added cost. The roads have to be constructed accordingly. So that's how development works. When you start developing a piece of property, you've got to develop as the planning department says you need to develop, and that's for future development beyond your development. You have to stub out the storm drain line. You have to stub out the sewer lines for future development to hook on. And so to do that, and talking about that area north of Rockwell to Dinuba, it's a big area. Probably, I don't know, maybe 1,000 houses could be built out there in sometime in the future. And you as the first developer, you have to bring the utilities out to it. So I'm just, as a developer, I'm just telling you, I've developed in Selma, a lot of apartments, built a lot of streets. And it always costs more than what guys like Isaac tell you it's going to cost. And I'm concerned about it. I mean, you can obviously do what you want to do, but I'll give you another example. When Chachansey Park was bid on in Fresno, the baseball park, my company bid on that project. Only 2 bidders. And I was also involved with Fresno State, and the people at Fresno State said, you know, Dwight, this is crazy. They have a baseball park right here, Biden Field. I said, yeah, I know, I built that baseball park. John Carberry can use this field. He can use it, won't cost them anything up front. It's just a monthly fee while they're playing their baseball games, and we can coordinate the games. And it's a great field. I said, well, why aren't they doing it? Well, John Carberry got mad at me, he said. I said, why did he get mad at you? He says, because I was telling him how stupid it was to go build something downtown and spend $30 million. Bid the project. Project came in over budget. And there was Malden Dorfmeyer, Pat Malden was the other bidder. He ended up building it. And they knew day one, this is going to fail. They knew that park was going to fail. And the city of Fresno took on that debt obligation, which they're still paying today. And they're going to be paying for many more years to come. And eventually, as you've watched it, the baseball team has gone now from their one status down to another status, and they'll be finally, eventually, I'm sure they're going to leave, not be around at all. But my concern about this development is that you need to know, you really need to know. And what happens is this, you spend the 750, and then you go, well, you know, we've got an estimate here. It looks a little bit higher. Okay, we're have to spend some more money to get this going. And pretty soon you're so far into it, you can't back out. And that's what happens to developers that go broke. They get into something, they can't back out. And all of a sudden they put all their money into this one basket and they're done. So I understand the mayor, this is passion, I get it. I think if it worked, it'd be great. But I think that Caltrans is going to put Dinuba Avenue overpass ahead of widening Highway 99, 3 lanes all the way. It's going to be a long time before that happens. Before they put in that overpass, it's going to be a long, long time. And so I just want to warn you, just as a fellow businessman, just be careful. If Cliff wants to put up the 750 to pay for those consultants, man, let him go ahead and do it. Let him roll the dice, because he would definitely benefit by his land that he's trying to do a shopping center. And that's great. If you have the ability to look at something else, look at Walmart's property. It would be so much less expensive, so much more accessible to the community of Selma. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr.
Thank
Nelson.
you.
Appreciate your comments and your wisdom. And I appreciate the reference that you gave me on the Walmart broker to talk to. And I did talk to the Walmart broker and asked him that question, if they would donate that land. And he said Walmart doesn't donate anything. So that would not be
Okay.
that wouldn't be an issue there. So I definitely looked at that avenue. And what you maybe are not taking into account on this is there is a really tight timeline, right? On
I
this
know.
park, a 2024. It's not just my passion, sir. It's the passion of our city council, who's representing the will of the citizens, and Coach Hoyt behind you, and these fine people that have come out on a Friday morning who are interested in what's happening with a major project, the first park in Selma for 32 years. So the way the park, just as a really brief reminder, the way the park was funded, the $4.4 million grant, was based on its area. And Rockwell, that area right there was the area that qualified for the maximum grant amount. So that area wasn't chosen necessarily because it was everyone's first choice, but it was the area that received the maximal revenue from the Department of Parks and Recreation. So
All I'm
that,
trying-
and there's been a lot of water under that bridge, and for you to come in and say, now we ought to stop the process, stop the engines and retool and go back, I don't know. I think that ship has sailed. You know, I don't know if I can tell you that there is no time to retool the project and to move it down closer to your area and your dealerships, which is a great area off of Stillman. I get that. But you keep talking about stopping this park, and we've gone a long way in this process with citizen approval and citizen backing. And quite frankly, we're trying to find a way to make this work.
So
And
let-
that's
let-
why we're here today.
Let me explain. Let me explain. Your system, in order to come and do this, you have to sit and wait in line and wait for somebody to tell us when we can talk. This is the first time I've been able to talk about it. I've been asking for months and months and months. I understand. I do. I get it. I really do get it. I'm just warning you as a developer. Let me do this for you. Schaefer Park, great park. It's a nice park, great park. And you've got a ponding basin, right? Ponding basin is fenced because it's a hazard to children. Rockwell Pond is like a big ponding basin. And you put a park out there, you're going to fence that ponding basin. I guarantee you're going to do that, because if you don't, somebody's going to get hurt. I just want to warn you. I just think it's going to cost you more money than you think. And so be careful, okay? That's all I'm saying. Now, later on, Jim Patterson said, don't build Chachansey Park. They did it anyway. Later on, if it turns out to be a bad deal, they say, well, Dwight Nelson came before the council on September the 10th and said, be careful, watch out. Going to cost you more money. And I'm just, as a developer, I'm telling you, it is going to cost you more money. So if you want to spend it, that's up to you. Thank you.
All right, with that, we will, if there are no other comments, ready to move on to the.
Just, sorry, Mayor, just one more action item or direction potentially. So we talked about the ARP funds. Is there any direction per se on those funds right now as far as how you want us to potentially move forward? Maybe an allocation to payroll so that we can free those up, or maybe you want 50% of it going to some type of infrastructure. Is there any direction in essence to those funds, or do you want to kind of bring it back for further discussion on just that topic again?
If I may entertain a little discussion here, I know that, this has been lengthy. Mr. Dwight Nelson, thank you for all the information you've provided to us. I want to make sure that, when we started having this conversation earlier in the day, we started talking and we talked about what the important points are, small picture versus big picture. Council, I speak to the council in general. I will be open-minded to do these items, but I will ask that we entertain in regards to certain fundings for certain parts of the bigger picture. And I'll name them. Just so we can have clarity. I do want to envision the fire department. I do want infrastructure. I do want the park involved, but I also, I admire Mr. Nelson in regards to Stillman Avenue. I want to see the infrastructure in regards to Stillman Avenue. I envision those 40 acres to be productive for the next, 10 years in this future plan right now. So with that, I hand over, when we start talking about funding mechanisms and amount of money, I want those 4 key points in there. Okay.
I concur. I think we need the fire, sewer, water, and the fire station, the sewer, infrastructure,
Stillman
and the new
Avenue.
park, and development of Stillman when that 40 acres gets developed. That's American Rescue Plan money, right? Allocation. Is council good with that?
Yeah, it looks like I have consensus. Thank you for the direction.
With that, we'll move on to a continued item from the last meeting, consideration of a resolution approving.
Mr. Mayor, can we add in that to have maybe a 45-day come back and give an explanation as to what they're done or what the staff has been doing in regards to what we just implemented?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so I mean, so the items that you're referring to, one, we'll do some type of cost analysis, right? So we'll talk about those items that you've relayed to me. First thing is, let's talk to engineering. What are we talking about as far as dollars? So what do those impacts look like? Especially when we're referring to sewer, because we have multiple sewer projects potentially. What are those cost factors for all those items? What are all those impacts potentially, what those look like? So thinking about those items, you really have to come up with the potential cost analysis. Obviously, it's really early because you can't have a construction doc, but we can talk with engineering and come with some type of potential what that looks like and start looking at those items individually and then say, okay, we want potential here, 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 and how that looks. Because that without a dollar to kind of identify, because you only have one pot for that, right? So 5.9, I can tell you a sewer project is going to be very expensive. So we have these items potentially 10 million, 5 million, whatever those dollars may be for all these projects. And you can say, okay, I want to put 1 here, 2 there, 5 there, whatever that number may look like, right? So that's your starting point for the next steps as far as the
But you'll
the
have
art.
clarity on the American Rescue Plan funds, how they can be spent.
I'm
within
hoping to have that in
45
the short
days.
term, correct?
Okay.
So that's the next thing too. So one, create that game plan because sewer itself is an item that's in there already. So, I mean, it's already predefined and that one's pretty straightforward. The rest of them, it's more of, okay, dollars and cents and what that all looks like potentially.
The way I look at it is when we start talking about our park, that already hits to Stillman. So we got, that's already the path. Those are taken care of. You look at and bring back all the analysis on what you're.
Another thing to look at it when you're just talking about Sloman as a whole, we do have street funds and do we want to look at that funding source instead of ARP? So, but again, it comes down to cost factors. We only have so much money, or are we saying you allocate these future monies? It still becomes a different mechanism in how we look at the two as well.
I agree. People can get to the park using Stillman rather than congesting Floral or congesting Dinuba. So expanding Stillman would be a good idea.
Yeah, another thing to think about too is Stillman's in the county. So what does that look like and how is that mechanism? Because there is added cost factors in agreements with the county. They have to do the inspections. There is added cost factors potentially on that. So we'll bundle that up and bring that information back.
That will move on to the next item, the continued matter, the consideration of a resolution approving a request to enter into an agreement with RRM Design, Inc. for professional architectural and engineering services on the Rockwell Pond Park project. Be Mike Kirschner, doing a report.
Mike Kirschner, Director of Recreation and Community Services, Mayor Roberts, Member City Council. This is the item was tabled for the design and architectural electrical services. That's why we were here today. I did want to mention Veneer Construction has revised our schedule based on today's decision, and we are at crunch time. And just he wanted us to relay that to the City Council. So,
Thanks for
any questions? Veneer is on the line, and I know a representative from RM is also on the line.
kind of move back a step in the process to look at the financing today. Did anyone have any more particular questions about this before we go for a vote for RM? Is there a most, well, does anyone in the public, would they like to weigh in on this topic?
Teresa Salas, 1701 Dinuba Avenue. The first line on here says that you received 7 RFQs for consideration. You picked 2, one of them backed out. So that leaves this one that you're voting on today. Were any of the other 5 people who submitted RFQs asked to resubmit, or were they were just kicked off and you just ended up with 1?
Mike Kirschner?
Actually, we can I think Jerry can explain the process a little bit better. So I'll allow him to chime in, but there is a formal process to go through, receive all the bid packets. Once you get to that package or that that packet that you receive as far as the information and how the scope works and what they do, you then rank them and you move forward in that process. At the end result, when you finish all your rankings and your due diligence, you come into a point where you say, okay, this is where the scoring mechanisms ended up. Because it's an RFQ, you can only open the final packet as far as the dollar amounts for that one packet, unless you throw it out completely or some sense of the way. So Jerry, does that kind of summarize it, or did I leave anything out? You're on mute, Jerry.
Can't hear you, Jerry. Call in. Jerry, do you want to call in?
Call my cell and I'll pitch you to a mic, Jerry. That's gonna be weird, but call into the number. Oh, you can call into the number that's on your screen.
715-8592.
Should be a pro at this by now, Jerry. Hold on, let's see if it works. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that. For whatever reason, I don't know why I'm not on. So Isaac was correct in his discussion about how it goes through the process. Am I getting feedback?
Yeah, turn your speaker off, I think.
Okay. How about now? Better?
Perfect.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that. So Isaac was correct in how he explained the process. So we go through the RFP process and there was 7 proposed AE firms that submitted. Out of that, you do the scoring and you whittle it down to a short list of 3. The 3 firms were notified and they were provided interview dates. And one of the firms decided they had just received 2 other projects and decided to further pursue. So at that point, the city decided, let's go with the 2 firms. We interviewed the 2 firms, and the top ranked firm was RRM. Their fee opened and noted that their fee was less than what the budgeted amount that was included in our budget. So there's a nice little savings there. The fee for the other firm was not opened. However, I was told from the other firm that it was substantially higher. I know RRM is on, but do not worry, RRM. You still gave us a very nice, gave the city a very nice budget number for your fee. So thank you. So anyway, is there any questions on that process?
It's still doable to complete this process if this goes forward today, Jerry?
Correct. RM's fee is within, it's below the budget number that the budget was carrying for AE services.
I believe he's referring to timeline.
I'm talking about timing.
Oh, the timeline, yes. So if I could share my screen, I could show you the current master schedule that has broken out. If you look at it, and then I can do a summary milestone schedule so you can see where we're at in the process.
Be good now.
Thank you. So I will share my screen and there should have. Are you able to see the schedule? Are you?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to blow this up. But before I do blow it up, you can just see how everything is tracking. So you see that the timelines here for purchasing the property, going through your SECO process, going through LAFCO, City Council, all those approvals for purchasing the property are right here. And then there's also some concurrent stuff. It's still shown in yellow here because we still haven't got the contract. The city hasn't contracted yet with the engineer who's going to be doing the road improvements. But this is the road improvement work here that's shown there. And then this from here on down where my cursor's at, I think you can see it, is the actual development procurement, the procurement process for the architect, with going into contract and then following into the design process and a construction phase here where you see on there. So that's kind of a blow up picture you can see, so you can see it visually. If I get in closer, you'll be able to see how everything has been laid out with all of the activities have been included, flushed out. Anything new is entered there. Anything shown in red.
Jerry, I think you're showing the project, our agenda that we normally see at the meeting. You're not showing the schedule itself.
Okay, let me see. For whatever reason, I'm not showing that. Let's see. I apologize. Let's try that.
I'm assuming you want to put up the bar chart that you
Yes.
normally use. Yeah, we can see it now. You're good.
Sorry about that. Okay.
Can you
So
send
that,
us this too,
message
Jerry?
Shows,
Email
and I
this.
just talked about how it shows the land acquisition, the due diligence on that part, and then of course the development of all this work here shown in yellow is the offsite work that the city asked us to provide schedule. So that can all be shown there. Offsites will be completed currently as it's shown on the schedule before construction starts. Construction's down here. Everything else here is the AE procurement. It's the design phase as we get further down, and then bid and award, and then actual construction. Right now, if we blow it up, you'll see that, again, everything is laid out there by line item. Anything in red shows what the city is going to be doing. As specifically, here's the city council approval of the agreement to move forward with the architect. Notice to proceed and project kickoff. We were anticipating, we haven't updated yet, was going to happen on Tuesday with kickoff today or yesterday, excuse me. Now that's been pushed out about a week. Should everything get approved today? But if we stay with those timelines, right now we show construction starting in February 2023 with completing the project in February 2024 ahead of the March deadline. But as I noted, or as Michael noted, if we continue to push this further, we're going to push past the March deadline for the funding, state park funding grant requirements. So that's a quick synopsis of the master schedule. I believe now you are showing now the milestone schedule. So this is kind of the major activities into the design phase when the architect comes on board. It's shown here the program verification schematic design started on 9/16, which would be this coming Thursday, and then gives them days for that. And then everything kind of flows from there and still shows the construction starting February 2023, completing in February 2024. You have time for transition and activation of the park, getting all maintenance trained up on all the various components of the park, mechanically, electrically, plumbing wise, and anything else that's required to be trained on, your splash pad, all stuff, give you a little time for that. Right now it shows the project going operational February 27th, 2024, ahead of your March deadline.
Thanks for that schedule.
And so we also did a cash flow analysis for the city based on the budget that Isaac shared for you. Here's the $14.8 million that I talked about. It shows all your direct, indirect hard costs, your soft costs, and your offsites. So it's a total package of everything that's going on for the project. As Isaac had mentioned, we did a cash flow analysis to show when you're going to be needing the major dollars. At what point? If you can see here right now, it currently shows a purchase in the property in September, which is this month. If everything goes, if we get this moving forward with the architect design agreement, and then at various phases of the project, design phase, the working drawing phase, the bid and award phase, and the actual construction phase, where your biggest dollars are going to be spent. That comes up to the $14 million. This shows your projected billings in a bar chart, and then your S curve, including soft costs, showing the cumulative cost of the project. And finally, I did note we've been tracking the project weekly, staff, and just showing item that we are identifying needs to happen, when it needs to happen, who needs to do it as a team, working with the city and your other various consultants to look forward. The next step is to obviously bring on the architect and start that process and going us into construction, and we'll dealing with those items and fill those items out. So hopefully that answers your questions and maybe provide a little more information than you
Thanks, Jerry.
requested.
Appreciate the information, schedule, and the cash flow and the timeline. And with that, we'll bring it back to council. Do we have anybody online who would like to talk about this topic before we entertain a motion? Anybody from the public would like to say
I didn't
something?
hear, what is, on a public works project, there's always a contingency. What is the contingency number that Van Air has come up with?
Did you hear that, Jerry?
Say that again. I didn't hear.
A citizen is requesting what the contingency amount is, our factor.
Okay, for what parts? We've got contingency for
For the project as a whole.
change order. Well, we have change order contingency, and then we have contingency for escalation as well.
What would those be?
What's the factor?
Sure. So currently, I will direct you to kind of answer the question. I will direct you, and I'll share my screen to show you the California construction cost and agreed by the state of California currently for the last 26 years, what that is. We base that continually off of those numbers. Of course, there's been a historical spike that would not continue to carry forward if we look at today's numbers and carry that forward for the next 2.5 years to the end of construction. That just would not be sensible to do that. But we would point you to the fact that is a construction cost and index history that you have to account for. So I will show you now on my screen if I can find it.
I see 4%, Jerry, for the change order contingency.
Correct. That's for change order contingency, but there's an escalation contingency as well that covers the project through midpoint of construction that all response coordinators need to account for.
Did you have a percentage for that one, Jerry?
Yeah, I think we're carrying about 5% annually that are by the state of California for any state funded projects.
But that's that is the percentage that you use for a state project, a state park
Correct.
project.
Any state funded project, they're required, and this
That's the minimum.
necessarily required, but we do that as best practice for any project that's state funded.
And that's the escalation contingency
Correct.
plus the change order, so 10%, 9%. Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to say anything about the park at this point? I didn't get the number on that, but that sounds right. $1.5 million, Jerry?
Yeah,
Of a $14 million
roughly,
project?
correct.
1.3. Okay, do we have anyone else who'd like to make a comment?
Frank Hoyt, 7887 South Del Rey. I'm also the president of Selma Youth Soccer League and then a parent of 5 kids in this community. To be honest with you, I technically do not live in the city limits, but I do everything in this town and I'm actually Selma Unified School District. My neighbor is Selma, I'm Del Rey. That's how it landed. All I'm here is just to make sure that we guys think about this park. You guys have all made comments and stuff, and I'm not here for a shopping center. I'm here for a park. The city has neglected, to be honest with you, the kids of this community, not building a park for this many years. And it's not your guys' fault, obviously, it's previous years and stuff. And we're a big advocate of this park. We really need it. If you want to see why we need this park so bad, go out to Abraham Lincoln tomorrow morning. I'll be out there with 800 kids playing soccer that the city cannot accommodate because I have to ask the school district and pay a lot of money to use their grounds when these are all taxpayers' kids that should be able to be playing somewhere. I don't mind paying for some type of use facilities, but I pay a lot of money to let these kids play soccer, and absolutely love it. And that's why I do it every single year. It's been my 7th year being the president. And if you guys get a chance, go out tomorrow morning, you'll see why we need this park and see the amount of stuff. If you want to get a concept of how big this park needs to be, go out there tomorrow too. You'll see the parking. You're going to see the green space that we need. I run 10 fields out there right now currently just to accommodate the kids of Selma. We start at 8 a.m. and this year's a little bit different because we are not playing with Fowler, but we normally play with Fowler. And so that adds on another 500 kids. And then you start doing the math, there's parents, grandparents, everybody. So, I really would like all of you guys, if any of you can make it out there, I'll be out there in a bright orange chant. You can't miss me. I'm a big guy. Okay. So you're more than welcome to go out there. And then I want to make sure that we can do this park, and I respect both the gentlemen. They're a lot smarter than I ever will be. Okay. But they're both, the thing about, to be honest with you, the Tertullian thing, he's owned this property for a long, long, long time. And for him to say that this is a hiccup for his property, it's technically not. This will benefit his property, having this park there, because he never talked about building it until this park got brought up. Let's just be honest. I'm sorry, sir, but let's just be honest. That's how it's gone through. And I've listened to almost every single meeting. I've said it, I never got to come in person, but I was on, and stuff. And then the Mr. Nelson, he's got a good point with that other property, but we also got that grant. I spent hours out there with Scott Robertson walking that field, and we walked a long way. So, I've been in this from the beginning, and I want to be in it to the end, and I would love to see this park built for the community. Thanks, guys.
Coach. Do you have anyone online or? Okay, with that, we will, I'll entertain a motion to approve RRM Design as the design company for Rockwell Pond. Is there a motion?
I'll
Is there a
second it.
Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Trujillo,
Yes.
Councilmember Guerra,
Yes.
Councilmember Mendoza Navarro,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Cho,
Yes.
Mayor Robertson.
Yes. Thank you for that. And thanks for the really good discussion. Thanks for all the input today. Really valuable. Very, very interesting to hear. And I know we'll have more in the future and more input. With that, we'll move on to our final item for this special meeting. It's a consideration of a resolution to create the position of a deputy city manager.
Yes, Mayor and City Council, the action before you today would establish a deputy city manager. That's the specific resolution action. The perspective behind it is that this action would begin the process of formally consolidating a number of departments and divisions that exist within the city, including our planning department, our building, code enforcement, engineering, public works, and economic development under one administrative structure, and really starts the process of rebuilding our planning department. Since I've been here and had the opportunity to interact with Fernando and his staff and major developers in the community, it is very evident that we need to get back to rebuilding our planning function. Historically, we have essentially, as a result of economic downturns, really downsized that operation to the point where we're becoming non-responsive to both the industry and to consumers and to property owners. So it is a high-profile area. It ties in very, very nicely with economic development. I think on a given day, Fernando is interacting with both new business prospects plus developers, and there is a synergy that we need to build on. I am optimistic that this begins the process of rebuilding that relationship, and the staff report gives it a little bit more detail, but the item today is essentially just establishing the deputy city manager and authorizing me to go forward in filling the position. Entertaining any
Thank you for your
questions?
report. Have any questions for the interim city manager at this point? Would anyone like to make a comment? Questions?
Teresa Fells, I have a question. We have an assistant city manager now, and this is for the deputy city manager. Will we have all these city manager positions, or are they going to eliminate the assistant city manager?
No, the assistant city manager is a separate organizational position, has responsibility for other administrative activities. This would be a new deputy city manager, the intent would then be to not fill the director of planning and development. We would move forward with filling the deputy city manager instead.
So the deputy city manager would be the director of community development. That goes away, or the two are on the organization chart. They're
Yes,
both listed.
the deputy city manager would assume all the responsibilities that the director of CD and planning has now, in addition to oversight of public works, oversight of economic development, oversight of our engineering function, and all the other ancillary activities that go along with that.
And then the salary range would be 135,000 to 164. That's a pretty healthy range.
Yes.
What's the reason for that?
The logic behind that is that in order to rebuild our planning and development function, we're going to, and the ideal is to have our own planning staff. And the market right now for planners is very competitive. So in order to be able to build in that structure, that would ideally include not only journey level planners, but senior level planners, you have to have that type of salary range in order to accommodate that.
The only one who would make more would be the permanent city manager. More than the
Yes,
164.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have some questions after you're done.
So I guess at this point, the way I'm looking at it is it almost looks like we're creating a position and a little more bureaucracy here to, keep someone with our city. And I don't know if that's, what the range, if that's sound management practice, rather than just, working with the individual themselves. I have another concern making this position of deputy city manager. It almost creates a presumption on the part of the deputy city manager that if the city manager leaves or goes away, or, for whatever reason, that the deputy city manager would automatically become assume the city manager position. And I wouldn't want that to create liability for the city, that they would be entitled to that job. And whereas, I guess to take it just a step further, it kind of ties the council's hands, because we have two hires, right? We have the city manager and we have the city attorney. And to me, it seems like it puts more, it takes away the city manager hiring function from the city council and puts it more as a role of the city manager. So those are my concerns that I have. with
The
this.
very good concerns, but organizationally, that would not be the case. The deputy city manager would only be functional over those program areas, those departments that we've listed. would not, if there was a vacancy as a city manager, that does not mean that this person or the position becomes the interim city manager at all. In fact, under our current structure, that falls to the assistant city manager.
Thank you for that.
I have a couple of questions. Okay, on the description here, it states economic development under the new deputy guidelines, but my question is is this Tracy Tosta's position?
No, it's the function. Tracy is a staff person within that function. Okay, but she is not, she doesn't oversee it administratively. That falls to the city manager. This is putting this under the deputy city manager.
And then I'm just kind of looking at the rest of the, you know, here, planning, building code, engineer, public works, economics. I mean, doesn't this also fall under the city manager's position? Isn't this her role
Well,
or his?
yeah, administratively, but from an expertise standpoint, it would be the deputy city manager.
I mean, you know, we talked about shortage of funds. I'm just concerned as to where are we going to get another 135,000 to 164,000. Where would this come from?
Well, the cost is really the difference between what we're budgeted for the CD and planning director and the new deputy city manager. So if you look at the report, the staff report, that cost is less than that. It's a range of 25,000 to, that's the staff report got away from me. 27?
Okay, so the
27
difference
to
is 25.
431 to
27.
55,
Mhm.
487.
And that's the full salary and benefit cost.
Okay.
And we're going to look at maybe offsetting that cost through other revenue streams. For instance, in public works, you know, using street fund money to offset the portion of time that the deputy would be overseeing the public works function.
Okay.
Wise organization chart.
No, we don't, because I'm still working. I'm working with Isaac, and I'm working on looking at beefing up the assistant city manager classification, because right now, the way that is currently designed or defined, it is not defined broad enough. It is narrowly defined.
Will they be on the same level? Will assistant, when it happens, you have city manager,
Well,
then
you
you'll
know,
have
if
assistant and deputy, or will
if-
deputy assistant?
if currently the assistant is higher in terms of its current presentation, but functionally it's not working within the scope of what an assistant should be doing. It's defined very narrowly, and that's one of the issues I think we need to clean up organizationally, because ultimately, and if this falls under my watch, my recommendation would be to have two deputies, not assistant and a deputy, two deputies.
Deputies
Yeah.
instead of.
Yeah,
a
but
deputy and an
that's
assistant.
somewhat premature right now because I haven't finished my analysis yet that I'm working on. So
Other questions?
How long has Fernando been here?
Fernando's been here, I think, what, 6, 7 months? Yeah, 6, 7 months.
I mean, I'm just a straight shooter and I'm just gonna be very honest. I mean, the projects that you had mentioned on Tuesday night, these were projects that have already been in the works for the past 2 years. So, and I'm just saying that, you know, if I'm a person that it's paid for performance, that's what I want to see. I want to see someone that has
So-
come and stated,
Councilmember, if I could just interrupt, I would just caution council not to talk about specific employees' performance. In this respect, I understand the concerns, but I would just caution against that.
okay, council, but this was mentioned on Tuesday night's meeting. I'm not saying anything that wasn't already on
Okay,
record.
and I'm not telling you not to speak. I'm just cautioning against talking about employees' performance.
Okay. Again, just to state that you were responsible for bringing a new business, let's just say a Costco, you know, a big box store, a Target, Smart and Final, Home Goods. you were responsible for that, then I could say, I can justify that difference. I can state that, hey, he's done it, he's worth it, you know, I can see that, but these new businesses or these projects have already been in the works. I've compared them to our last spreadsheet and they're all on there. And I mean, maybe, you know, 27 isn't a whole lot of money, but when we're talking about, we're in a crunch to get a park completed, get other projects, our infrastructure's not there. I mean, we kind of have to look at this. If it's a staff that we're eliminating and that person's no longer, and that salary could be justified, then I'm okay. But that's me personally. I mean, if you want to add anything, or maybe if I didn't speak correctly on something and you want to clarify something, you know.
If I could maybe explain something, the proposal before you, especially the expansion of public planning and community development, has nothing to do with the individual per se. Whether
No.
that's Fernando's here or Fernando's not here,
Right.
this is my recommendation to move forward to build up that infrastructure so that we can better service the developers, the business community that's interested in bringing in businesses. This is not tied. The recommended salary range really is from an internal perspective in terms of relationship to the city manager and then relationship to any professional staff we would bring in to man the planning function, okay? It has nothing to do with, we don't have a pay for performance necessarily in the city of Selma, okay? We have salary ranges that are driven to some extent off of a market, what a market demands. And the market right now for planners, professional planners, is very competitive. So this is what this is doing, is building the structure. It is not an attempt to reward Fernando for any activity he's done or not done. Okay, that's not the purpose of this. So this is organizational. That's the
Sure.
purpose of this action here.
I have something. Are you done? Are we done?
Yeah, I'm okay.
So in regards to this, and it's so funny because 2 years ago, we sat here and we would say, hey, when's that economic development? Have you applied? Have you gone and where are we at with that economic development? Where are we at with an engineer? Where are we at? And are we gonna hire someone? Are we? This you're recommending, I applaud you. We need, first of all, I don't think municipal governments pay are valued on performance evaluations. But what I will say is this: words like bottleneck, words like developers coming saying that our city we're non-compliant. We don't respond. We don't respond. City Manager, I applaud you for bringing this discussion up, because at the end of the day, we need to set aside and think out of the box and think for our future development for the city of Selma. What we're gonna do, not have bottlenecking. If this is a source of weighing to make sure that the developers, when they come in our community, they're gonna see that we have a structured plan. I'm for it. I'm a big proponent for making sure that we elevate our game. Our game's gonna get elevated. This community is gonna change. We're gonna move it to the new direction. We're gonna make sure that we're professional. We're gonna make sure, and this is the way we're gonna do it. We establish good workmanship. We establish good guidelines. We establish good people to work for us, and we set the tone. The city of Selma needs this. We need this. I'm speaking to our council. We need this. We need professionalism. We're developing more projects. We have a lot. Councilman Guerra said, she's right. There's a lot of projects here that were here from last year, but this will enhance us and make, can you imagine all the responsibilities our assistant city manager had, and for us to sit back and say, we need this, we need that. We need our team. We need more people, but we need professionalism. Three meetings ago, we were here talking about our fire department, saying that some of our people are going to leave because they're getting paid X amount of dollars. Here it is. Here it is. This is where we need to set the stage. We need to be the legislators that we are and start finding the money and getting our staff paid accordingly so they can all be able to feed their family. Because at the end of the day, it's all about feeding the family. So I applaud you and I thank you for bringing that. And with that, if you guys, we're ready.
One last thing. this has nothing to do with the individual by any means. I'm just talking about the position. And to me, exactly. So I don't think any of us are talking about the
No.
individual. I just think creating another position, adding the cost. I understand what Councilmember Guerra is saying, and I agree with that. You know, adding cost, we have to be careful about adding the cost given the obligations of the city in the future. And I guess I would rather beef up, as it were, the assistant city manager position, or look at, you know, hiring more in-house talent, you know, hiring an engineer in-house, hiring more planners in-house, bringing that in and doing what we need to do from a salary standpoint, rather than creating another layer of management, which we've seen other management entities in Selma have a problem with, creating too many layers of management, because we have a really dynamic team right now in Selma. It's been decimated of late, but the people who are here are really, really good on top of it. And I would love to encourage that. This is awesome. At the same time, people come and go. That's the reality of life and people moving on. And I would hate to have this high priced position that we would have to fill, you know, just to fill a position. And the clarification question, the way I read it, was that is at the discretion of the city manager, whether the deputy city manager position would be filled or not. Would that be the same with the assistant city manager position, or would it come back to the city council?
Both of those positions are filled by the city manager.
And that's my point. I mean, you've got two positions. Times can be lean sometimes when there's an excess demand for city employees. Again, people can come and go. It's a key position, and I understand the logic behind it. But for the size of Selma, having an assistant city manager and a deputy, or two deputies for that matter, to me seems a bit excessive in terms of cost at this point.
I appreciate that. I would just ask that we look to the future. We look to expand so that we can bring in the revenue source to support the type of infrastructure and the type of development within our staffing that we need to do. Right now, if you were to add a planner, that planner will probably be paid more than what your director is paid because of our archaic pay structure. So this is really looking forward to try to build that structure and to try to minimize that cost as much as we can. So it's really more of a forward-looking proposal than it is.
From city manager, if it's okay, if I add a few comments. And I appreciate the discussion. You know, all your comments are very well received and understood. Just from a sort of background perspective, this conversation is something that started when Teresa was here as the city manager. And, you know, when I came in and looked at the structure of the community development department and how some of the functions that are tied to community development were being managed and, you know, under other functions, there was a little bit of disintegration, a little bit of disconnect between those functions. I think, and I don't want to speak for the interim city manager, the goal with this is to be able to, this is kind of a foundational step, to build a comprehensive development services department, essentially, where you have planning, you have building, economic development, public works, and engineering. And now I think Ralph is correct in saying that it's very competitive right now, you know, to even hire a planner. But if we have a structure that is attractive to planners, you know, that we can hire a senior planner, an associate planner. You know, I've spoken to previous staff who, you know, have filled me in on kind of what our staffing looked like before, where we had senior planner, associate planner, assistant planner, housing rep. We had a building official. We had a building inspector and a few other staff. Our goal is really to integrate those positions eventually with economic development, because when people are looking to come in and build to bring a business to Selma, planning is right in the middle of it, along with economic development. Engineering needs to look at utilities and storm drain infrastructure and, you know, what streets need to be built. You know, public works looks at LLMDs, landscape lighting and maintenance districts, how do we structure those? Are we, if Amberwood comes in and we have to pay to maintain that landscaping, that communication needs to happen between Public Works and the planning department and engineering. And so this communication is facilitated by having them all under one single structure, and it makes it more seamless. Some of the issues that in our conversation with developers is that people don't talk to each other at the City of Selma. Different departments are not communicating well, and so things get dropped, and that's why it's taking so long to move these projects along. And I think what the goal is to provide some, not just continuity, because as we build up, with staff planners and move away from consultants who are always going to have a role in Selma, to build that continuity, that engagement with the developers, and that communication and integration internally to move things along. So, that's from a perspective of a community development director and a development services person. I think this is a good way to go, but funding and everything else obviously is a concern. So I appreciate the discussion, and I want to just give that background on this.
I appreciate that. City manager. Okay, the difference that you stated, 27, you said you're looking at a different funding source to offset
No,
that?
I said the actual increased cost is the difference between the deputy city manager and the director of planning and community development. That's really your increased cost,
Mhm.
because you're already paying, a certain amount for the director position, okay?
Right.
So then we're going to look to see where we can even offset, all of that is coming out of the general fund. So that increased cost would come out of the general fund. What we're looking at is see to what extent some of that could be offset through the Public Works Street Fund, because that's a funding source there. So the impact of the general fund may be less once,
Right.
That's really the
Could be
maximum
less,
impact.
yeah. Okay, I mean, I have to tell you, I'm not disagreeing with Fernando's statement at all. What he has said, he's right on. We've heard this numerous times from contractors, developers, citizens of Selma. Nobody talks to nobody. They come in here, we've heard numerous times that their application fell and nobody got to them, and we're still waiting for the two gas stations to go on Second Street. I mean, that was something that was supposed to happen last year. I mean, I get it, COVID, everything's happened and it's kind of put a stop to it, but I'm not disputing anything he's saying because what he has said is true. And I definitely am looking for professionalism, and I think that we need to have someone at that capacity to treat these developers and individuals, like I've stated before, like royalty, because I've heard they just go to the other city and they get treated like royalty. So we can't lose that. And so for that, and I appreciate the clarification, and I'm good. Thank you.
And again, I'm really good with everything you said, Fernando. Everything was spot on. Interim city manager, what you said was spot on. What I object to is the cost at this point, and I object to having two layers of city management. I think it's too many. I just think you could beef up the community development director. So it's just a matter of syntax that I'm having with the issue with this at this point. But I'm all for consolidating and having the folks under community development communicate in order to provide better customer service to our citizens, to our developers, and to get away from this disconnect that we've had for years and that Selma has been burdened with. So I agree with that. I just don't agree with the detail. So with that, is there anybody who would like to say anything? Okay.
Yeah, I would too. Okay, I'm like to say new council person, and I have heard, Selma's always been in a stagnant form. Nobody's talking to anybody. And I really appreciate Fernando. I think the city needs fresh new eyes, okay? New eyes with an open mind. And I think I see that in Fernando. Okay.
Anybody on the line? Okay, does anyone have like to make motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Call the roll, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Cho,
Yes.
Councilmember Mendoza Navarro,
Yes.
Councilmember Guerra,
Yes.
Councilmember Trujillo,
Yes.
Mayor Robertson.
No. And you know why, my reasons. That passes, and with that, we'll call for adjournment. Is there a motion? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for attending today.